Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond. My name is Denise Rhymes, and it's my honor to serve as president of our congregation. For those of you who may be new to us and those members and friends who are tuning in from near and far, welcome. We are so grateful to be able to connect with you. We're a community of many faith journeys and beliefs, committed to being deliberately diverse and fully inclusive. We want you to know that whoever you are, you belong here. We are a community that is resilient and committed to healing, does the work that needs to be done, and commits to maintaining and establishing our relationships. During this season of many holidays and annual traditions, May you find sparkles of joy as you navigate this time differently. To paraphrase the American author Howard Thurman, philosopher, theologian, educator, and civil rights leader, may we work always to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among brothers, and to make music in the heart. Please continue to visit our website at richmonduu.org and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, be sure to log in about 5 to 10 minutes before the service starts to catch all of the current announcements. Let us continue to stand on the side of love together. Thank you for being with us today. May this be a comforting, centering, and a restorative moment for you. Thank you for spending your time with us.
We light our chalice to these words this morning by Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limit in voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. So let us light our chalice and worship together.
Our service today happens At the end of autumn, many, many leaves having fallen, nature speaking to us of the essential. And many of us have spent a lot of time moving leaves. Not me, but somebody I live with. We're going to talk today about something that is far, far away in time. In time, we're talking about a period 140 years ago to as recently as about 45 years ago. We're going to be talking about a universalism and its theology and the practice of the faith in a time where thoughts were very different, understanding was very different. We're going to be talking about 4 wonderful folks whose devotion to the faith of universalism was engaged in a tremendous struggle, full of oppression and doubt, and yet persevering. So that will be close at hand because it's a story in Norfolk and in Suffolk, and how the Universalists there succeeded a long, long time in pulling together a meaningful congregation and practice of faith for the education of young Black people. And we're going to feel how close to ourselves it is, how easy it is for institutions to get things wrong because they empower the wrong people, they don't understand, they say one thing and they do another. And we're going to understand how tremendously successful can be a commitment to a particular justice issue and the willingness to stay with it and see it succeed, down to the essentials. Welcome. Welcome to a time of worship. We are so grateful that you've given us time for this community to gather together. I hope you're feeling welcome and at home. I hope you've said hello in the chat box. I hope you feel that this is a space and time that is yours to help co-create. Welcome to a time of worship.
Slowly but steadily, in the following years, a new vision began gradually to replace the dream of political power. A powerful movement, the rise of another ideal to guide the unguided, another pillar of fire by night after a clouded day. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity born of compulsory ignorance, to know and test the power of the Kabbalistic letters of the white man, the longing to know. Here at last seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged but straight, leading to the heights high enough to overlook life. Up the new path, the advance guard toiled slowly, heavily, doggedly, only those who have watched and guided their faltering feet, their misty minds, the dull understanding of the dark pupils of these schools, know how faithfully, how pitilessly this people strove to learn. It was weary work. The cold statistician wrote down the inches of progress here and there, noted also where here and there a foot had slipped or someone had fallen. To the tired climbers, the horizon was even dark. The mists were often cold. The Canaan was always dim and far away. If, however, the vistas disclosed as yet no goal, no resting place, Little but flattery and criticism. The journey at least gave leisure for the reflection and self-examination. It changed the child of emancipation to the youth with dawning self-conscious, self-realization, self-respect. And those somber forests of describing his own soul rose before him, and he saw himself darkly as through a veil. And yet he saw himself, some faith revelation of his power, of his mission. He began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in this world, he must be himself and not another.
I invite you all now into a time of meditation. Will you join me in a time of reflection and prayer, a time when we connect with what is ultimate in our own existence? Spirit of love and of life, we are told to develop our personality, our unique persona. We are told that it is valuable to contribute to the greater whole, to community, to family. It is good to live as individuals. And while we know it is true, it can be hard also to understand that billions of personalities are no guarantee that love and freedom and a general sense of justice will be evenly distributed among us. We hear today the words of people who long for justice, and we know how hard it was to win. We know there is injustice in so many places, and yet we fail to see our own part in it. Spirit, grant us in this time of thinking about and celebrating Black lives, grant us the measure of understanding that we are all powerful to come together and to speak to what is wrong in our institutions, to speak for what is hoped for in our future, and to take measure of ourselves, to take measure humbly, because though we want to get it right, we don't. We pray that 140 years hence, something of what we're doing in our lives, in our community, in our larger sphere of influence, we pray to have left something to the good and held back what was evil and taken apart what systematically denied justice. Spirit that is good and true and whole and compassionate, help us to believe that we are capable of the same. Blessed be. Ashe. Amen. Amen. It's December, and our Share the Plate this month is for the Minister's Discretionary Fund. The fund asks all of us to pool some extra dollars and make them available to people in the congregation who may have a period where they fall short on some income, waiting for a job. Things may be rough. There may be more expenses than they anticipated. Sometimes it's just that planning went awry. We want everybody in this community to know that if there is such a time, they should let us know. And we'll have the funds because of your generous contributions to the minister's discretionary funds. We do reach out to some people in desperate situations who ask us for help, people who need a bus ticket back home, or someone waiting to start a new job on Monday but has rent due on Friday. We've been able to do that because of your generosity. The minister's discretionary fund is overseen by your ministers, and we have help from a lot of our lay leaders who are aware of some needs in the community and point to them and let us know that would be helpful. If you know such a person in the community, please don't hesitate to make us aware. We're very happy to share the generosity of the congregation, and the offering will now be taken and graciously received for the minister's discretionary income, and we will share it out with other people. Thank you.
As he is creator, so is he the parent of all. See, then, that there is a common bond, a tie, uniting the vast family of man. No national boundary can dissolve this tie. No distance, no circumstances of birth or of color. No misfortune, no oppression, neither poverty nor vice, nor disgrace, nor death can sunder it. When men can cease to be offspring of God, then they will cease to be a brotherhood. Who, believing and realizing this, can be unkind? Who can be oppressor of his brethren?
When Black Lives Matter, then celebrating Black lives is what is normal, usual, comes readily to all of us. And yet, out of a history of separation, out of a history of white dominance, the celebration of Black lives is not ordinary. This month we're going to learn just some of the many, many people who made a commitment to Unitarian, Universalist, or Unitarian Universalist faith. Some of whom suffered greatly for the commitment that they made, sacrificed much, persisted often, and there is much to be celebrated. There are also, honestly, painful realities, tremendously painful realities of the gap between the dominant folks, their idealism, and the actuality of faith. This is true even today. It is easy to be intellectually committed to being anti-racist, and factually not so much. It is a challenge always to live out the commitment. And this month, we're going to celebrate folks who have lived their commitment despite oppression, being ignored, not taken seriously, being the bottom of the list in consideration. I think we're going to learn a lot. And I hope that you will enjoy the theme and the resources that we'll be sharing and providing as we celebrate Black lives. The story I want to tell today is a simple one. It's the story of Joseph Jordan. His name is spelled Jordan, but it's pronounced Jordan. And that's a helpful thing, because we're going to meet some other Jordans later on. He was a free-born Black, born in 1842 in Norfolk. There were a number of free-born Blacks in that area who made their living as oystermen. And as a youth, he did that. But along the way, he picked up the skills of carpentry and became quite proficient at that, and began, as a very young man, to build houses, rent houses, and live off the income of those houses. He was a bit of a real estate entrepreneur in Norfolk in the 1860s and 70s. He was also somebody who became involved in preaching, and church was very important to him, and he grew up as a Baptist and was ordained in the Baptist tradition to preach. And so he did. But in the 1880s, a friend of his lent him a copy of The Plain Truth of Universalism, a book by Thomas Whittemore. Whittemore was a historian of the early Universalist church, and he had written the reading that you heard before, the one that aspires to name that everyone is a child of God, and therefore no one should be treated any differently than any other child of God. Words that were written in the Northeast at a time when many of the states that did have slavery at one time had manumitted the slaves. It was a very idealistic sentiment, but it was a sign of powerful hope to Joseph Jordan. He found it remarkable. He started to read everything he could get his hands on, including the sermons of ministers. He studied and finally got to a point where he totally wanted to be in community with people who actually believed this. And he heard that there was a strong Universalist community in Philadelphia. He packed up his bags and went to Philadelphia, to the Church of the Messiah, the main church in Philadelphia, where there he met the minister Edwin Sweetser. Sweetser was a committed abolitionist, and he was delighted to find this young man, Joseph Jordan, coming to him to ask, how can Universalism work for people of color? Because Sweetser knew that the Universalists had kind of wrestled with this problem a while. You see, after the Civil War, even during the Civil War, many of the congregations and denominations of the North decided that they had a moral obligation to send support to people of color in the lower southern states. A very famous number of denominations sent missionaries down, established schools, including the Penn Center, which was set up by Unitarian mission folk. The reality of this was that Black folks came together to build centers of learning, some of which became universities later on. And the Universalists, who were a little slower in getting started, I think, were really aware that they had perhaps not fulfilled that mission. When Joseph Jordan appeared in Philadelphia, Edwin Sweetser took it as a sign that there were people in Virginia who were interested in the theology of Universalism, which he felt was natural for all people, but he had hoped could reach out to communities in the South. Joseph Jordan stayed in Philadelphia 7 months. He became more or less an intern. And when he returned, the congregation then received approval from the Universalist General Convention and recognized it. Joseph began to gather people at a place at 42 Lincoln Avenue, appropriate. They rented a room, and by the time they appealed for that membership, they had about 50 people attending. But Jordan had a commitment that was beyond the forming of the church. He was a very, very hard worker. He wanted to start a school. Now, think about this. Post-war, many places that were founded by different denominations began schools. And schools began on their own. And of course, we have Hampton and other places, VUU here in Richmond, where Lumpkin's slave jail was transformed by Mrs. Lumpkin, a woman of color, into an educational center, which ultimately resulted in Virginia Union University. A proud, proud story. Fabulous story, right? Well, Jordan had the same feeling. Joseph felt that children needed what education could give them: literacy, access to investment, opportunity, much as his life had been an example of. And while everyone now was nominally free, the resources were not there. So he started a day school. Now, to do this, they needed a bigger facility. So he went to the Universalist convention meeting in D.C. and said, "We have $491. Is it possible you could help us build a building that would allow us to have a sanctuary and a classroom? And we'll use the sanctuary during the week for a classroom, so we'll have 2 classrooms. Would that be okay?" And the response, though unplanned, the response was that they raised $2,700 more, and because he was a carpenter, they built their own church. Fabulous. Fabulous. This little congregation, just years old, built a church and a school in Norfolk. Amazing. Jordan asked, could he please be ordained? In 1885, he asked. He was granted a license to preach. And in 1889, he actually met with what was an ordination committee that included Sweetser, with whom he had continued to be friends with and was a continuing mentor, and a man named Gerhardus Demarest, who would wind up being a leader in the Universalist Church later on as the general secretary, and a man who was formerly the minister of the Richmond Unitarian Universalist Church. He was a Universalist minister, a man by the name of James Shrigley. Now, think about this. 3 established white Universalist ministers met with this man of color, the first person to be considered for ordination in the Universalist tradition, who was coming with a congregation, a building, a school they had built, and was saying, "I would like to be ordained." I kind of wonder if Reverend Sweetser engineered a favorable committee, because I know that right up the road in D.C. at the National Cathedral was a minister who opposed any such thinking and was a racist by habit of mind and who wrote widely in Universalism. I wonder what kind of effort had to be put forward to make it happen, because the very next day in Philadelphia, that committee had approved and then ordained Joseph Jordan to allow him to return to his congregation in Virginia as an ordained Universalist minister. That's a great story. But as you can imagine, now we have one minister of color ordained in the Universalist tradition. Imagine how particularly unique and lonely that might have felt But Jordan was an amazing, amazing man. The height of their attendance at the school was about 90 students. Jordan taught along with others, hired other teachers as well. Two of them would be very pivotal in his own life. Thomas Wise would succeed him, and actually the two of them together would start some other mission places we'll hear about another day. But also, he married one of the assistant teachers there, a woman who was 27 years his junior. They had a son, and Jordan died, his wife died, and the son died, probably all of tuberculosis, within 5 years. But let's think about what the man did. First of all, he broke the color line in Universalism, a religion that always says it embraces the brotherhood of all. Well, that leaves out half of the population to start with, but let's just recognize that they were leaning forward. Secondly, he was an industrious guy who didn't let anything stop him, asked for what he needed, although we only have the one record of the support. There's some other documents that indicate there may have been some mission support work that allowed them to expand. And he organized the whole thing, and though he was not trained to be an educator, though he was not, he had not gone to formal schooling beyond very basic stuff, he was committed to providing that to the youth of Virginia in the late 1890s and 1900s early. These kinds of folks are really amazing. These people who have a dream and put their shoulder to the wheel and help other people start to vision it and make it come forward. There would be temptation here to maybe lionize Sweetser and some other folks who, thank God they were there, but really the heavy work and lifting was done by people of color in Norfolk, which makes us proud and should be celebrated. How amazing from nothing to create a community because you hear a word of faith published that speaks to you about a theology that truly makes sense in your life. You know, Unitarian Universalists have a publishing press called Beacon Press. It's a nonprofit publishing house, and one of the commitments they have is to raise up the voices of people on the margins. So many Black authors have been published there. Many viewpoints of indigenous people have been published there. Of GLBTQ folks have been published there. They're raising up the voices that we must now celebrate. You can be proud that some things, like the publication of Thomas Whittemore's Plain Universalism, right down to today, the history of indigenous people, for example, continues in our faith. But there have also been very real truths, which are that Joseph Jordan was left to his own devices to make things happen. Maybe that was good, because if a bunch of white folks showed up to tell them how to do it, which would have been the modus operandi, it might have stopped happening. And there's also great pride in doing your thing. But of course, churches continued to be segregated in Virginia, as they do right to this day. And we all know the hard work of trying to bring forward the truth of all people into the center of a church, when a dominant paradigm just sometimes always sees itself as entitled to be called normal. All of us have to fight this. All of us have to ask, would we have had the dedication of a Joseph Jordan, or would we have gotten in the way? when we say that Black Lives Matter, are we prepared to celebrate Black lives? Not just in Black History Month, not just when we celebrate Dr. King's birthday, but all the time, in December, and in March, and in April, and in June, and in July. Are we going to be people who look to find the inspiration in people who lived our faith and are living it now? That's really important. And the last thing that we need to understand is there's a great deal of difference between an intellectual assent to something and a lived reality that we join in putting our shoulders to the wheel. The truth of the matter is, as Ibram Kendi says, I am an anti-racist and I'm a racist. If we've grown up in this culture, we are not always aware of the many ways in which racism has been portrayed as a normative, acceptable behavior, dressed up and sent to Sunday school. And we, in fact, have to confront that as well. Just the other day, I was in line at Costco, and as everybody filed through, it was a long line with their baskets, I noticed that one household was being scrutinized a long time. Everything was being counted carefully. Was it a coincidence that it was 2 Black women in a line of white folks? I don't think so. So I had to say something, and I did. But what else can I do? We have to see and break through into an understanding that Black lives are to be celebrated by everyone. And then lives will matter more. May it be so.
Into a time of turmoil, we bring our sense of peace. Into a time of doubt, we bring our gift of faith. Into a time of fear, we bring our light of hope. Into a time of loss, we bring our treasured memories. Into a time of silence, we bring our uplifted voices, sing a song of wonder, of mystery, courage, singing life itself. Into this time we come singing, singing, singing life, singing life, singing life itself.
As I've preached my sermon, this chalice has struggled. There's adversity, a breeze, the cold. It took me quite a bit to get it lit. And now it can go out at any moment. So what we need to remember is that every generation needs to take the responsibility to relight the chalice that symbolizes our faith. We can look back 140 years and see that it can be put out by forces that sometimes were not known or calculated, and other times were well known. And yet, the perseverance of people of devotion, people who would not give up, that is so evident in the history that we've heard about today. Joseph Jordan, Thomas Wise, Joseph F. Jordan, and Mary Jordan kept this flame alive for the congregations in Norfolk and Suffolk. And for that, we have been given a great example. Go forward and live the faith. Believe what we must believe about the future, to include all in beloved community, to make no difference between race and color, because whether we believe in a God or not, it ought to matter not one whit, for all of us must be called to freedom.
Structure